I believe I am live. Seemed to pause there for a little bit. Yeah, again, I never know whether to wait till anybody comes in to watch this or not, or just start with my thoughts on this. Well, obviously, as the title suggests, I'm talking in this episode about what I've just watched, which is the new Dark Side of the Ring, the Chris Benoit tragedy episode, the first episode in series two. Um, I will say, certainly here in the UK, you can go back on. I have Sky television, so you can go and you can search for the first series, and you can watch all of the first series. Obviously, again here in Scotland, I was able to watch this episode due to YouTube because somebody put it on YouTube. I think a few people put it on YouTube channels, and I watched it in two parts. It's not on UK TV as of yet, and we have no details regarding that as of yet. But I will give people the heads up if I hear when that episode in the series is going to be aired on Vice TV in the UK, or available on whatever platforms it is. But like I said, it's up on YouTube, though a lot of them will be pulled down. Uh, but certainly, as I will talk about, it's certainly an episode worth talking about if you are worth watching, I should say. And actually talking about, I would like to hear people's opinions on the episode as well. The Chris Benoit episode. Wow. I've heard the in part one of the interview on the Jim Cornette Experience. I believe they've also, the producers of the show have also appeared on the Talk Is Jericho podcast that I just downloaded a little while ago. I think it's a brand new episode. I think it is, and what a horrible dark situation, dark side of the ring, as they say. This series does look at legitimately the darker aspects of and the darker incidents of professional wrestling, and this is certainly one of them. The Benoit tragedy is certainly one of the darkest times, darkest incidents, uh, most horrific things that's happened in professional wrestling. I don't think there are really any words to describe how professional wrestling fans felt when news of this Benoit tragedy broke. Um, and I may talk about how the news breaking a little bit later, but there was no words really to describe shock, horror, all those kind of words didn't really encapsulate, um, how all this happened. The news of this happened was it June 2007 when this happened, when the Benoit tragedy happened, June, July. It was shocking to everybody how that this when this news came out that most of the Benoit family, Chris, Nancy, and Daniel, had all passed away. And this is, I have to seriously give it up to the producers because this is a genuinely a good episode of Dark Side of the Ring. As I said, we've seen already the first series dealing with various different incidents, such as the Monerics, Fabulous Moolah. There's quite a few the Montreal Screw Job. There's some really good episodes in that. I think 6 or 7 episodes in that series, and I did a review of most of them previously on YouTube. I haven't actually admit. I have to admit I haven't watched the entirety of the last episode, the Fabulous Mullet episode. I still have that on my Skybox to watch. I will get around to that and maybe do a video on that. But this episode of the Benoit tragedy, I don't really want to go into kind of reviewing it step by step this episode because it's 2 hours long, approximately 90 minutes without adverts, which is how I watched it because it was clipped. The adverts clipped from it. This story is certainly it's a mixture of the story of Chris Benoit, Kevin Sullivan, Eddie Guerrero, and Nancy Benoit. There's several characters or people involved, obviously, in this story. It is not simply just taking a look at Chris Benoit. This episode, obviously, initially, and obviously most of the way through, it centres on Chris Benoit, concentrates on his life, his career. Um, and again, I don't really need to recap that because there's a WWE DVD. I've got it somewhere. That during that two spell in, was it 2004, 2005. I think it was summer of 2004 when WWE released the Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit documentary DVDs. I have them somewhere amongst all the wrestling DVDs and that I have. This really is the story, especially early on. This episode deals, to move something out of the way. This episode certainly deals, and it deals with both Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero very early on into this episode. It very quickly obviously gets to Eddie Guerrero and Chris's wrestling careers. Eddie could be an episode to himself. Like I said, we've seen different presentations. I'm sure. I think at least Eddie's is probably on the WWE network. I think I would have to go and double check that, but this episode certainly, it tells the story of not just Benoit but of Eddie as well, of their careers, of how they met in Japan, how they well, Eddie at least first of all didn't like Chris, and then obviously they're just, it was a story of basically two very similar personalities in the same industry of professional wrestling, both very hardworking, very, very driven. And I think that is something that I think some people may not pick up on it because some people may not have kind of watched other documentaries about Benoit or obviously been around when he was alive and wrestling. Chris Benoit was a hugely, hugely driven guy. You kind of it's kind of hinted at when they talk a little bit about his childhood, his upbringing, and about him watching the Dynamite Kid, and we all know he was influenced by that. Benoit was always, always a very, very driven individual. Very hard on himself, very strict on himself, and we get that. And like I said, we get that because I don't really want to try and tell the story of this episode because the episode is a really good one. But we hear about how they get together and how they spent. Eddie and Chris spent obviously years together in New Japan. I think they were together a little bit in ECW, certainly WCW, obviously, and then they make the jump to WWE, and they're just intensely close friends. They're really, they get along very well, and you can see not only is Chris Benoit a very driven person, he's also very private. He's really, really a private individual. And you can see that Chris really didn't open up to anybody. He was a bit of a hermit, as they say later on. He didn't have a huge circle of friends. He didn't really confine in a lot of people. He wasn't a very sociable person either. And I think, obviously, again, even when it's difficult even for me to say, not as a wrestler, but even in WWE, you hear about that, about certain guys travel together, like that's how like the Click and D-Generation X came to be. Eddie and Chris were guys that really bonded over their international travels. They faced each other all over the world. And like I said, they ended up in WCW together and WWE on pretty much the same schedules. Obviously, they came into WWE they went into WWE together as the Radicals, and both prospered from there. And I think a large part of obviously of this documentary, especially the first 45 minutes of this documentary, is about their friendship, about how close they were, about how I said they were driven, and I think it is absolutely clear while watching this documentary. Now that I didn't know this already, again, I've been watching wrestling for well over 35 years now, and even though I've been watching American stuff for maybe around about 30 of those years, more American and international stuff, I think really the story of Eddie Guerrero and his ending is, I don't know, it's difficult whether, given this is a 2 hour documentary, it's difficult to really say Eddie's death is the starting point for Chris going off the rails, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that we hear from a lot of different people in this episode. It's actually put into two parts, but it is. I believe last night it was shown as one episode. I don't know exactly how it was cut because what bit I saw, it was like last time, when it went into the second part, the second video that I downloaded, it was last time on Dark Side of the Ring. But they did make it, I think, into two episodes, but they put it together. Eddie's death. I mean, you hear from a lot of different people. You hear from Nancy's sister, Sandra. You hear from Chavo Guerrero Jr. You hear from Dean Malenko. You hear from Jim Ross. You hear even from David Benoit during this episode. And all of these individuals have certainly I would say it's a certainly a serious part to play. I'm not sure exactly how to term it, and that's how I end up a lot in these videos. But they certainly have a story to tell as part of this entire story. They all have their experiences and their viewpoint and their own part in it. It's not as if they were just simply onlookers. David Benoit, the son of Chris, Chavo, obviously the nephew of Eddie, and part of the whole Guerrero family. They were more like brothers. Chavo has always said that. Eddie said that when he was alive, that they were more like brothers. And so it's certainly the end. The passing of Eddie Guerrero is the start, maybe the kickoff, maybe the flicker into life of the kind of, I don't know. Is it the into madness that's suggested, or is it in the death of Chris? The end of Chris Benoit. Um, when Eddie passes away, you said you hear so much about how close they were, and everybody knows that. If you're a wrestling fan, you most likely know pretty much a lot of the story of what's being talked about Nancy and Chris getting together during the Kevin Sullivan storyline, and obviously, like Jim Cornette said on the Jim Cornette Experience podcast, he thinks, and I truly do believe that Kevin Sullivan finds it pretty much virtually impossible to actually talk about anything like around this right now. I do think that Nancy Sullivan, Kevin Sullivan, and Nancy Sullivan's story. I would think that would be a great story to tell. We do get a recap of that as well as the story goes on, but I genuinely think that that is kind of as close as we'll ever see it. I don't think Kevin Sullivan will absolutely, tell the story. Again, it's been what 15 so years almost since this whole big thing. I don't think that Kevin will really ever tell the story fully of, because everybody knows what happened. Kevin and Nancy were, they got together after when she was involved in wrestling full time, divorcing her first husband. Nancy and Kevin fell in love, and there is a little bit of a suggestion of abusive relationship in there. I don't know whether it's true. I mean, Jim Cornette, and who obviously knows pretty much every individual involved in this story, apart from, I think, Sandra, Nancy's sister. I think he said he never met her, but obviously guys like Jim, who worked in wrestling, knows or knew all of these guys or these people involved. There is a little bit of a suggestion that it was a little bit of a abusive relationship, and that there was some incidents towards the end, which is why I would love to hear Kevin's side of the story. But as I said, I don't think we will ever hear that. We hear about, obviously, a lot of people will know this. Nancy and Kevin. There was the storyline where Nancy, who was woman in WCW, she was supposedly getting together with Chris Benoit, and then that turned into real life, and they got married. They had Daniel. David was already around from Chris's previous marriage, and it's certainly, again, I think one of the main points of this whole story is the passing of Eddie Guerrero, and we hear Chavo once again tell the story. He's told it a few times on podcasts and that, and I have to say, I think of the people that really are talked to in this documentary are pretty much, they're innocent parties, I would say. David Benoit, especially, that's the point really made in the last quarter of this this documentary is made that David is innocent. I have never thought of David being anything other than an innocent party in all this. His stepmother, his father suddenly, passing away, his brother, his half brother, passing away. I've never ever thought anything of David as just an innocent party because he was a kid at the time that all happened. He wasn't even there. He had nothing to do with it. But the Eddie Guerrero passing, we all know that had effect on Chris, and I think it had far more effect on Chris than anybody really ever really knew. I mean, one of the stories, again, I'm not trying to kind of recap this episode because I want people to genuinely go and watch this episode when they can, where they can, hopefully on television, hopefully in the right circles. Again, I watched it on YouTube, but still be, as I said, watching it on when it comes on UK TV and rewatching it and taping it and recording on my TV box and looking at it again. But the stories, even just like obviously Chris going around to Vicky Guerrero's house, who we hear about, and obviously at that point, as I said, Eddie had passed away, so Vicky had started kind of getting involved in WWE. We know that she was on screen as an on-screen character. It's just kind of one of the ways that WWE reached out to her to kind of support her family. But stories that Vicky tells, such as Chris coming around to their house and spending time, in Eddie's gym. Eddie had a home gym, and for Chris to spend time there, crying his eyes out and being upset, and all of these effects. It's obvious that Eddie's death. We all know again that Eddie's death had a really, really horrible impact on Chris. Whether it was the tipping point or not, and I'll talk about CTE in a couple of minutes, but that certainly had a more profound effect on him than I think members of the public saw. And we've heard various stories and various aspects, like I said, on podcasts, on different YouTube channels, and different people have talked in various different media outlets and interviews about the effects about what things that Chris Benoit did after Eddie's passing. Things like, I think things like we hear about a lot about, and I still don't understand why Mike Benoit, Chris's father, gave copies of Chris's journal to the media. I really sincerely do not know why he did that, but we hear about that journal, that famed journal. There may be pages online that people can read. I don't know which websites, if there is any, where people can perhaps read copies of. I don't know whether the whole thing's ever been allowed to be put online or whether it's available. Obviously it's not available as any kind of book, but that famed journal that Chris was given to write down his thoughts, his feelings, and basically write to Eddie as if it was a letter that he was going to send Eddie. It was like Eddie had once again been fired from WWE or retired or moved away to some faraway place where work commitments meant that Chris, who was obviously still with WWE right until the end, it's like, it was almost kind of like pre-social media days where he would write or private letters. So he would write like a letter to Eddie with his thoughts, with his feelings. I sincerely don't know why that was ever pages that made public. And like I said, Mike Benoit was the one that really said, "Oh, this is looking at it. This is the journal of my son's descent into madness." I think that kind of stuff, that is supposed to be therapeutic. That is supposed to be something that you write your feelings down. It's supposed to be cathartic. I think the word is. It's supposed to help you express those feelings so you don't bottle them up. Um, and that kind of behaviour, that's supposed to help. That was supposed to help Chris, but in the end, unfortunately, I don't think it is. I think there was a potential there. There's always a potential there of this kind of therapy. And I don't know. It's never really discussed what type of therapy, if ever, if any, Chris undertook, because obviously he was still on the road and that, continually on the road with WWE. But that kind of that kind of journalist and writing your feelings and thoughts down, like I said, even if it's a letter, dear Eddie, wish you were still here. This is what I did today. Oh, I wonder what you would have thought of this, or you would have loved this, or you would have been disappointed in this, or oh, I screwed up in the match, which we hear, about a great story with Chris Jericho at the beginning of the show, about a spin kick. And Chris, again, another example how hard he was. He did a lot of squats because he felt he'd screwed up taking the spin kick from Jericho, where he, from all accounts, he hadn't. It was just he thought he had, and he said he was just because that is his personality. That kind of stuff we've heard about before. The journal, again, why it made public, I do not know. But I really think that one of the things to move this along, because I want to try and keep this about half an hour. I just think it's slightly easy to kind of sit and just doing it as a live stream. I know I'm kind of gabber on a little bit sometimes, but I think honestly one of the things, though we will never know, we do hear from Chris Nowinski, who's become a huge CTE, which is basically damage to the brain. I'm not even going to try and pronounce what that actual stands for. The CTE, I think it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy or something. Anyway, that continual damage to the brain. I do think that played a large part in what happened to Chris. Obviously, they did examine his brain and they found a lot of CTE, because he did take a lot of trauma as a wrestler and doing that diving headbutt, which is what weirdly, I suppose, kind of weirdly, the second half of the second part, so the last quarter of the documentary, kind of moves into, and that is talking about the damage to Chris's brain and whether that led to what whether it must have affected his brain, but whether it caused what happened, because obviously right after this incident happened, the media all jumped on the roid rage, the steroid rage, the testosterone rage, the chemicals, drugs, and everything that was around in wrestling in those days. And obviously, Benoit is one of the reasons why the wellness program is so tight nowadays. Jericho, even who also narrates this, I should have said, but Jericho's narrating this series. It was Mick Foley the first series, and now Jericho's going to be narrating the second series. And we hear about, even from Chris Jericho, about lots of drinking and etc. going on in the early 90s. To be fair to part of it, they were really young guys in those days, and so a lot of young people will kind of do that stuff. They'll go out drinking a lot more than they should. They'll smoke when perhaps they should, or hopefully keep away from the dangerous substances. I mean, anybody in pretty much a lot of Western cities will know that that doesn't always happen. And certainly seen it here in Dundee myself. Whether all this affect Chris, I do think it had an effect on Chris. Whether it actually caused what he did, I don't know. And one of the things that is amazing to hear is you actually hear from the officer, Officer Allen, I believe. I think it's Larry Allen. Maybe getting that name slightly wrong. That is one of the weird things, the horrible things of this episode. You actually hear from the officer when WWE become concerned for Chris's welfare, that he hadn't shown up for. I think I'm pretty sure it was Clash of the Champions or Clash of Champions, however they titled it. I believe Chris was supposed to go up against CM Punk. I think it was for the ECW Championship. Again, I should have maybe quickly checked that, but certainly, they became concerned from after receiving obviously the text from Chavo. We even hear from the officer who started the wellness check, which is just an amazing and a great thing to hear in one way, that you hear from again individuals who were around. And that's how I appreciate not only the cinematic kind of reconstruction of the wrestling that they do on the dark side of the ring. If you've watched the first episode, the first series, you'll know what I mean by that. It's a lot of lookalikes doing and kind of in the shadows, but doing a lot of the wrestling and kind of acting and dressed up as the people that they're talking about, like Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth, and Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon, etc. Who we see, it's the we even hear from the guy, like I said, we hear from the guy who actually, the officer who took the call, who went and did the wellness check, and obviously him and his partner, who they call Officer Monday. I'm not sure whether that's the lady's real name, the officer's real name, but they go in there and obviously they find what had happened. They found, and I don't want to go into too much detail because it's horrific details and very gruesome, and I really don't feel I need to. I don't really want to tread on all of that stuff. To be honest, I don't really want to walk through all that. That's one of the most difficult parts of this documentary, is to hear about the the um the discovery of the bodies, the discovery of the scene, and there's obviously been lots of rumors about what potentially happened. Some people say he did it. Some people say he didn't. To be honest, my opinion is that Chris did do it, and then obviously passed away himself. Though I will say, very quickly, there was obviously, again, with any of these kind of situations, and then there is a little bit of talk about WWE doing that Monday Night Raw where they paid tribute to Chris. I will say though that I don't blame WWE really for doing that at all, because, like I said, the news came out pretty quickly. Um, but what the authorities, like, I mean, I know some people will say, "Oh, well, it's JR. He's still, even though he's working for AEW now, what JR is saying is trying to protect WWE and what work he was doing at that time." The genuine truth is that, as far as I remember, about 13 so years ago, now almost, what news came out was that the family had passed away, and there was immediate thoughts and rumors, reports that there was something like, as is suggested, as talked about a little bit in this documentary, that it was intruders had came in and in an attempt to rob a well-known wrestler and try and get a lot of cash. They'd done horrible things to them. It was intruders, or it may have been, like, again, also suggested, one of the rumors that went around pretty quickly was that there was carbon monoxide poisoning, as is suggested. Again, those were the two big rumors that was immediately going around. It wasn't immediately reported that this is the truth of what had happened. And I still think that is the truth of what happened. I think that Chris did do what he did. I don't want to go into it too much because it just feels wrong to me to go into the details, which are talked about a little bit in this episode, to pretty horrifying details. So it is quite a heavy episode. I I would say that it's that's what the rumors went around immediately, was that something had happened. Somebody broke in, or there'd been some type of gas escape, carbon monoxide, that had killed the family, because it's happened before. Old boilers. I think it's an older house that they were in, slightly, and that those were the immediate rumors. As far as I remember, there was certainly no suggestion of the truth of the situation. So some people will say, "Oh, how could WWE?" But again, WWE, I think, were being told by the authorities that simply they'd passed away, or I don't think. Obviously, it takes time for the authorities to investigate these, and you have to remember their their bodies were found on the Sunday, and I don't think the truth really came out until early Tuesday. I think they were still taping SmackDown, certainly early Tuesday in the US time, until the kind of truth started seeping out about what had actually happened, about the although the police officer said that he thought immediately that kind of way, which he may well have done due to his policing experience, and we don't know exactly how experienced he is, but or was at that point. But an experienced police officer, he may have thought that more from immediate from what he was seeing there in the the evidence of what he was seeing. But that honestly, the truth was not known until didn't really get out until Tuesday after. So it was the Sunday that they, I believe, they found the bodies. Then the Monday night, as I said, WWE were just told they'd passed away, and then they obviously put on the Raw that's not on the network. I think it's a highlight program that's on the network. That's one of the episodes that's on the vault. That it's kind of in the vault of WWE that will not be shown. There's rumored to be quite a few pieces of footage in a WWE vault somewhere or digitally somewhere. I suppose these days, which is not for broadcasting or use of anything. Like the Owen Hart stuff, which is another episode that's coming up, which I think will be very, very difficult to watch for me, because I can hardly watch Over the Edge anyway. And I'll talk about that when it comes to the Owen episode, which is I think the last episode, about 9 or something. And so I might do episode by episode review. I might not, probably not. I don't know, depending on what this lockdown and stuff, but. Certainly, WWE were given information that they'd all passed away, and they didn't know the truth until Tuesday. So its obvious thing to do is to pay tribute, which is what they did on Monday Night Raw, to Chris and to the family, to Nancy, to Daniel. It's a very, it's good to see Sandra, Nancy's sister, and David, again Chris's son, kind of reunite and kind of start rebuilding that relationship that we see at the end of the episode. It's a very, very heavy episode. I will kind of try and wrap this up a little bit now, because I said I want people to sit down and watch this episode themselves. This is a very heavy episode. If I had to kind of take a break between the two episodes of this, I downloaded it in 2 parts, so it was kind of easier. But I had to kind of honestly take a little bit of a break after part 1 before I watched part 2. It's a very, very difficult episode. For me personally, I was a huge fan of Chris Benoit. Chris and Eddie and Dean Malenko, and also Chris Jericho, they came along in wrestling at a really great time for their careers, where light heavyweights, junior heavyweights, cruiserweights, whatever you want to call them, they really were coming into their own with the rise of the Mexican luchadors into more mainstream prominence. The Japanese junior heavyweights, where also Jericho and Benoit and Malenko and Eddie, Eddie, Chris and Jericho and Dean, they all worked in Japan, and that's how kind of they got them their reputations, was to work in Japan and to be seen as the hugely talented wrestlers that they were. Chris, especially, I was a huge fan of Chris Benoit. I was really excited when he started that feud with The Rock shortly after going into WWE. I thought, great, here he is, former WCW champion. Although I'm never sure really these days whether it's actually acknowledged or whether it's really ever been confirmed that he was a WCW champion. In my opinion, he was. But these were a great group of wrestlers. Eddie and Chris, certainly phenomenal wrestlers. You cannot take away from their skills. And this episode is absolutely again, I think Chavo says it greatly at the end of the episode about you have a great picture of Eddie and Chris, and you have several during this episode. There's one, I think it looks like they're outside of a gym or something, but it's Eddie and Chris, and Eddie's got his arm around Chris. It's amazing how one guy's career is vaulted and lauded and talked about how great a superstar he was, and that's Eddie. But yet Chris's career is obviously, due to what he did, basically ignored. Should he be in the Hall of Fame? I've said it before. I'll just say simply in one word: no. Due to what he does. Due to what he did, no. Simple. That's my only thought on it. It's a very heavy episode. If you're a wrestling fan, around those days, if you were a fan of Eddie, you're a fan of Chris Benoit, you lived kind of through that situation, you witnessed what was going on. I warn you, it's a very, very heavy and very difficult episode to watch. These, I would say this episode is not for everybody. It deals with very, very serious and very genuine themes. It deals with obviously passing away, um, quite vicious acts. So even if you're a wrestling fan, I would kind of prepare yourself a little bit to watch it. It's a very difficult episode to sit and watch. If you want to break it up into parts, I would suggest to do that. But the Chris Benoit tragedy, it's great to hear again from guys like Chavo and Dean and JR and Sandra, Nancy's sister, and to hear David Benoit talk about this for the first time again. I've never thought of David Benoit as anything but as innocent, completely in this situation. He was not there. He was away with, he was living in Edmonton with his mother, and you hear about how he found out. And I have to give them respects to the stories that these people tell, the situations that they've been through. Chavo, especially, and David, all these guys. Vicky very bravely talks about her husband, and the whole situation, because Vicky was so involved in the situation, as you hear through this. So I'm going to wrap up. This is far too long a video that I'm probably rambling a lot in this video. But it's a really good episode. Really excited to see the rest of this Dark Side of the Ring season 2 episodes. Like I said, there's various Brawl for All, Owen Hart. I forget which other ones there are coming up, but this is a really good episode. Like I said, if you're a fan of Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, or if you're a wrestling fan around that time and maybe fell out of watching wrestling, or want to really kind of, even if you're a younger wrestling fan and you want to kind of hear about these kind of things, absolutely go watch this episode. But I have to warn people, it's very heavy. It obviously deals with very serious topics and matters that I said may not be suitable for all, but I said, I would say to people, go watch Dark Side of the Ring, the Chris Benoit episode, where you can. Hopefully on television in your area when you can. If you can't get it on any of YouTube or whatever, if it's because these episodes will be taken down on YouTube, I'm sure. But certainly, it's well worth watching. As I said, don't expect it to be comedy. Don't expect it to be haha. It's not storyline. It's not pro wrestling stories or anything like that. It's very, very serious and genuine matters that are dealt with. It's a very sensitive subject, obviously, for many that were involved still to this day. But I'll end it there because I do encourage people to go and watch it. It's a very serious, it's very genuine. I don't know. For me, I said, it tells the story. This episode tells the story of Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Kevin Sullivan, Vicky Guerrero, Nancy, women's Nancy's sister. Tells absolutely. It's not an episode. I'm struggling trying to end this, but it's certainly not an episode I think that people want comedy or want haha, look at this. It's a very serious, very sensitive matter, subject, and situation, and I sincerely hope that people don't treat it as any with any lightness. It's a serious thing, and I honestly think this should be treated as such.